Welcome to Rox Talks. I'm Faiza.
I'm Parazan.
And today we have Amani Jabril, who I am a huge fan of, and I'm so super excited.
So am I. But a quick bit of business for the Rox Talks channel. We have hit 100 subscribers. We have hit that milestone. So thank you everyone who has been tuning in and subscribing and liking and commenting our videos. It means the world to us. So thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate that.
Thank you. And without further ado, let's get to this. So the first time I saw you was at Roxanne Shelbys Fez night. Was that the third one that she did?
I think so, the third Fez night.
At Biblos, and that was, I have to tell you, this is why, one of the reasons I'm such a huge stan is because that was the most powerful experience of Tarab.
It was a great show. It was a great show. I agree with you 300%. But I mean, that kind of thing comes together, I sort of, once in that sort of blue moon kind of thing where the folks who are making up the audience are just really into it and they're bringing all this warm, happy love, and the dancers are feeling that and they're bringing it, and the musicians, of course, I mean, Isam and his crew, oh my God.
Yes.
In rehearsal that day, seriously, the first song, I was just like, oh, okay, this is going to be so good. And of course, Roxanne, seems to bring it all together effortlessly. So, it really was this like perfect, as you said, perfect storm of sort of tarab, that it was just a really fantastic moment in time to just all be there together.
I went to Roxanne's class the following week and we were working on a collegiate piece, and one of the things that I mentioned was watching you. It had never occurred to me before, and I've been dancing for over 25 years, I think. And, it had never occurred to me that I didn't just have to flip my hair, da, 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 because that's just what I had always seen. That's just what I always did. And then you were there, you're like, boom, boom, boom. And I was like, oh! You were the expression of the music, which is, of course, what we all are trying to do. It was beautiful and amazing.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the compliment. As we were, sort of talking a little bit earlier before we started the show, I'm always surprised when people are paying attention because, I really do. I'm in this dance, and I've been in this dance 25 years now, and I'm still here because I love the cultures, because I love the arts, because I love all of it. And I'm just always surprised when other people are paying attention, because I'm just like living in my little corner of the world. But the music again that night was just so fantastic. I mean, how could you just not rock out, right? And the funny thing though with the set that I did that I don't think many people know was that all of the dancers in that show were going to do like two songs, right? Like maybe two songs or a song and a drum solo with Isam, or so I thought. And then the day of, Roxanne and Isam start getting together and talking about what they want Amani to do for the show. And it's sort of, so now from this like little 2-song set, it grew into, what was that, like 4 songs? So, I'm not going to say no. I mean, I'll dance all night if you let me. But again, it was, the energy was high and people were vibing, and it was just a sweet spot to be that night. But back to the Khaliji, and I take your point, because I think for me, things kind of shifted when I started, like we all start right here with a belly dance class, and you start to learn what is and what isn't. And I think we've become really, really accustomed to seeing things through the eyes or through the lens of a choreography, right? It comes sort of pre-packaged to us in a different way, and I really do think we have gotten completely distanced from the fact that these are folkloric dances, right? And now when I say folkloric dances, what I mean is that these are like dances that you do in your mama's kitchen with your friends and your family and this kind of stuff, right? It comes from people live with these dances and live with this art and with this music. And so for me, at least for the Khaliji, and I really need to be honest and say that my Khaliji it's a mutt at this point. It's a mutt of things. I started here at the stage, and probably much like you, I learned the right. And then I had the very, very good fortune, Dondi Dallin hooked me up with Lydia Zingani in Dubai, and I got to go and study with her the Emirati style of Khaliji, right? Very stately, beautiful stuff. And then I just started seeing other things. In fact, it was in Dubai the first time that I witnessed Iraqi Kauliya and didn't know what I was looking at until later. In fact, I thought it was really poorly done Khaliji. I thought, what is this girl doing? I'm watching her dance. And then later I was like, what's going on. Further on down the road, I had the opportunity to get to spend some time with the Al Najum dance troupe out of Muscat in Oman. And then, of course, dances from Oman have influence of so many things from, India and the Indian Ocean, all of these areas, Gulf Arabic, which you would see sort of the Khalij, right? But then, of course, we also have to remember it's sitting right there on that horn, right? And you're getting all these East African influences. And so Omanis do this whole other thing. And so, to be brutally honest, I think my Khaliji is definitely the stuff that you saw me do that night was definitely a mutt of, I think, a variety of things that I got when I was in the Emirates, in Oman, and then, of course, from Iraq. But it seems like it was enjoyable, so.
It was.
I fully agree with you with the fact that we come at it from a choreography thing, because one of the things right now is I struggle so much with improv. I was showing my mom these two different songs, and she was like, and I was showing her Bitwana Speak, and it was like, and of course I'm doing the chair dance where you're just sitting in your chair, but you're doing the stuff, and she's like, get up and dance, and I got so nervous, and it's just my mom. But I'm like, oh my God, she's paid for belly dance lessons for over 10 years. Got to make it look worthwhile.
First off, you're dancing to a piece of music that's not in your native. I mean, I'm making the assumption that you're not a native Arabic speaker.
You are correct.
You're dancing to a piece of music that's coming out of a completely different cultural context than you're familiar with. Now, does that mean that it's forever off limits to you? No, of course not. It just means you have to cultivate meaning. So the example that I like to give is this, right? And I grew up in South Carolina. There, I said it. So what I mean though is in South Carolina, right? If in the summertime, let's say you're out maybe tailgating, having a barbecue or something like that, right? And some Lynyrd Skynyrd comes on, right? And everybody rocks out the Lynyrd Skynyrd. And growing up in that context, I just told you what my context was, right? Where did I hear that song? I heard it at a barbecue, or I heard it at my high school dance, or something like that. You have all of this context. You've lived with it so that it's making meaning for you. It's not just a song anymore, right? So my point simply is that to come, to have Bitwana Speak, which is a fantastic song, right? And all of the emotions that she's singing about, right? I feel safe with you. You've had that experience, right? Mm-hmm. But it's just in a different meaning, in a different context, in a different language. So my thing is that we just have to cultivate those opportunities with the music, right? You have to cultivate a relationship with Bitwana Speak. So how do you do that? For me, for example, and then I'll get off my soapbox, I promise.
This is fantastic.
Stay up there.
So how would you go about cultivating meaning with Bitwana Speak, for example, right? The last year or two, I suspect sort of in reaction to many things in our community, but I've just been really feeling the need for old school stuff. I just really wanted dance music circa 1995, rocking out Hakeem and Amr Diab, and just a whole bunch of stuff that right somewhere between 95 and 2000 was just it was fun for me. Okay, now it means something to me because that's also the same period of time when I moved to Atlanta. I started dancing full-time, professional belly dancer. Oh my God, paying all the bills doing that. And so I didn't know all of those songs at the time. So some of those songs, especially Bitwana Speak, when I met that song for the first time was sort of in about that time period, right? And I was a baby belly dancer. I was in the big city, right? I was on my own, you do that whole thing, right? So that's what it attaches to for me. So now when I hear that, it takes me right back there. So that's what I mean to say is that we absolutely can cultivate that. Oh, I remember that song. Here's what it means to me. And this other kind of stuff. But we're also doing it through our own cultural and linguistic filter. That requires a little bit more work, don't you think?
Yes.
But I do think that's something that's being missed is that I do think we treat our belly dance. You have to do, as you said, you had to do Bitwana Speak perfect. You've had 10 years of this and you've got to demonstrate sort of, all the stuff you can do and what you've learned and all this other kind of stuff. But I really do think that that's something that's getting missed in our community is we are not cultivating a personal relationship with the arts. And I mean, at the end of the day, that's what it is, right? It's your art. We both danced to Betwana Speak. It's going to be wildly different, right?
You know, and you saying that makes so much sense because Betwana Speak is one of the ones that I actually really like when I first started dancing, I knew that this was like one of the ones that you have to know,
right.
like along with Aziza and Layla and Sheik Shak Shak, like it's one of the ones that you have to know kind of a thing. And I was just really struggling with it because I didn't know how to dance to it. And I was like, well, you know, there's so many songs that I have such fond memories of. And it's funny because it's the same era that you were just talking about.
Yes, isn't it?
Rakim and Amir Diab and everything. But it's because I was just learning in your class. And so I was still like so bright-eyed and bushy-tailed about it. And like, you know, I had all of these friends that I became really, really close with. So like when I listened to, you know, Habibi Ali or any of that, I just think of dancing in the troupe and like the ridiculous rehearsals that we used to have with my friends. And so when I was doing Betwana Speak, I thought to myself, like, you know, I have no idea how to dance to it. I should really do a choreography to it. But I think what my brain was thinking was like, I need to build that context for it. Because like one of the things we would do is at the student showcases, like there is a particular drum solo that we all used to dance to that we called the Jim Boz drum solo.
Oh, I love Jim. He and I did a workshop together like a number of years ago. We ended up at an Irish pub kissing a moose. It was great. It was good fun. I love Jim. He's great.
As one does.
But it's funny because we all knew this drum solo, so if you were dancing to it at the student showcase and you looked over at your friends, you would all do the same head move at the same time. Like it's that context, it's that familiarity, and I think that's exactly what you're talking about and what I didn't realize that I was looking for when I was like, I need to choreograph Betwana Speak. It's like, no, you just need context, you just need memories.
It's not that it can't be done, but I like earlier that you said, you talked about like Betwana Speak and Sheik Shak Shok and I think a few others you named off, that you had to know. Mm-hmm. If you're going to be a belly dancer, you have to. Why? Who made these rules?
Whoever made that CD.
Tell me who said that you have to?
Shira. Shira, she's lovely.
Shira's fine.
I mean, I'm sorry. No, I'm not. No offense or disrespect to any teachers. My point is simply that, again, this is another thing that I think that I find in our community is that there's this sort of formulaic approach. A plus B equals good belly dance, done it the right way. Well, no, it's an expression. I mean, if you want to look at some of the fine artists in the world, look at the Picassos or the Monets. People that you would think of sort of in these high culture kind of things, right? I mean, there are imperfections in the art. That's what makes it art, right? Because it's not a formula. It does have meaning. It does have context. When it doesn't have these things, it's not art. It's kitsch. Anybody can buy the Monet keychain at the gift shop, right? But the actual Monet itself is something else. And I don't like. I mean, I can understand the desire to want to get on stage and people are watching you and you want to make it as perfect as possible. But I don't think that's interesting. I think we should allow ourselves, to start to root in the meaning, root in the context, and just and try to sort of grow from there, as opposed to A plus B equals perfect belly dance show. Having been in the community and having been in this dance again for 25 years, I mean, you get to see sort of the ebbs and flows of what's happening with the community and interest levels and what's cool and what's not. I really kind of think, definitely, I would say in the last 5 years or so, I really do kind of think our community is sort of in a crisis of conscience of where to go next. Who are we? Yeah. What are we doing?
Yeah, I would agree.
Past putting on a flashy costume and getting on stage and doing a wowzer, choreography. What are we doing? Where's our meaning?
Yeah, I would agree with you. So, can you tell us more about your background in anthropology?
Sure. Where to start with that? This is always the challenge, is to find the abridged version.
Yes.
Having said that, the reality is that I was offered a full-time gig at Imperial Fest here in Atlanta back in 98, 99. I had finished my undergrad degree. I was kind of, freewheeling, had the opportunity to come and dance. And that just sounded really cool, right? going to go be a belly dancer. And I really loved the city. I really loved what I was doing. I wanted to do graduate work. I did. I also kind of truthfully needed a better excuse to my mother as to why I was in Atlanta and not coming home to South Carolina. And hey, Mom, I'm not coming back to South Carolina because I'm a belly dancer. At least at the time didn't quite ring true. I was like, hey, I can stay and do my graduate work here at Georgia State. And that's what I did. And actually, I didn't even know what anthropology was at the time. I was looking for something in the social sciences. I knew I wanted to do social sciences. And my mom happened on the program. She was helping me kind of look through things. And she happened on the anthropology program at Georgia State. She was like, hey, this looks like you. You should check it out. It absolutely was me. Kind of like belly dancing, the first day, the first class, and belly dancing my first shimmy, I giggled like a loon. The instructor must have thought I was insane. Same thing with the anthropology class. I was like, oh yes, this is so good. Yes, this is great. Okay. Exactly where I wanted to be. And you have a few sort of life-changing moments, and this was absolutely one of them, was sitting in that Intro to Anthro course and hearing the professor say that, well, cultural anthropologists tend to look at the world as being man-made. Apart from the biology aspect of it, really, we make it. It's man-made. Yeah. This was, wow. And it was just wonderful for me because I thought to myself, well, crap, if it's man-made, if the way that we think about things, the way we walk, the way we talk, it can be man-unmade, right? And you can remake it. And I just loved that. I loved that idea. So I was dancing. I was in this graduate program for the MA for Anthropology. And eventually I needed a thesis. So I looked around me and I was looking at Imperial Fez and the places that I was dancing. I was like, this is kind of cool, because you've got all of these interesting sort of Middle Eastern characters and new Americans from the Middle East. And a lot of them would talk about sort of all the stereotypes and what have you that, Americans have of the Middle East and Middle Easterners. But then they also owned places with big cushion seats and tented ceilings and belly dancers and things like that. And so this confused me because I couldn't quite decide, okay, wait a second, whose side are you playing for? And where am I supposed to be? Where am I located in that conversation? Am I helping with these stereotypes? So that was sort of the root of like the MA thesis about Arab American identities. And that was really, really, really interesting project for me. Later, it was much later. So I taught anthropology since 2003, so for a number of years. It was much after the master's that I went for a PhD, and my department chair in anthropology at Kennesaw State, where I was teaching, said to me, hey, we have this new PhD program, International Conflict Management. It's interdisciplinary. It looks like you should go check it out. And lo and behold, here we are. And so between the anthro and the dancing, I've been very fortunate to get to go to a number of places in the Middle East. I've gotten to go all over the world, all over the US. And it's just been a really, really, really interesting ride, especially when I'm going out to teach somewhere and I'm getting on the plane to go teach somewhere. I can't but always think of like my high school guidance counselor telling me to go get a business degree. It makes me giggle. It makes me giggle. Miss Hackle, guess where I am? Thanks.
That's pretty cool. How do you feel it has influenced your dance, your academic side? How has that influenced your artistic side?
Well, it's what I do. It has turned into a career, a strange sort of, really, where on what guidance counselor's checklist do you find something like this? No. So the PhD for me, I went more into the realms of visual art. For those who don't know, my husband is Kurdish from northern Iraq. And it was an area of the world that I didn't know much about, and the people that I didn't know much about until I met him and became a little bit more interested in the story, as you can imagine. But he himself was a refugee. He himself is still an artist. And I have to tell you, the stuff I'm doing now really were rooted in a lot of our first conversations and his stories of growing up there and doing art there and the struggles and having to leave. So the stuff that I'm doing now, I'm working with Kurdish visual artists in northern Iraq at that intersection of conflict and activism. And there's a really, really vibrant, dynamic art world there that there's next to no documentation on. There's this whole scene, and so much of that whole scene has to deal with politics. You can't be an artist and not be politic. Right. You can try, but you can't. You kind of have to do, especially in terms of like who you're paid. Just to get patronage, you have to be politic. Right. But it's really, really interesting how these artists are using their own work, their own personal work, that politic, kind of like us, the politic of who gets the gig and how you get it, this kind of stuff. And then the spaces that they're producing work. And all of this, you're getting some really, really interesting critiques of the society and traditions and things that need to change. You're getting a lot of really interesting conversations about power, who has it, who doesn't, why. And it's a fantastic world. And I'll say what the anthropology specifically I think has done for me for dance is that it's rooted me with the people. I don't want to come off as that white girl. What I mean to say though is that when I'm learning a new piece of music or a new dance, or I'm interested in a piece of art, or whatever it is, the first place I turn is not a book or a library. It's the people. Right. So, go to a native, start there, have those conversations. Case in point, we're getting ready to do the second iteration of Making Faces, Art and Intersectionality in Iraqi Kurdistan. It's a special issue of the Journal of Intersectionality. And the editor asked me, well, so what sort of topic would you want to do for this second special issue? And I said, I'll be right back with you. And I went and I talked to the artists that I worked with for the dissertation and for the first issue and said, okay, guys, tell me, what are you guys talking about? What's hot? What's important? What should we be talking about? And this is the direction then that I'm taking.
I wanted to ask you a question, and if this is weird and you're just like, I don't have an opinion, go ahead, just tell me that.
Sure.
But I brought this up in the episode that we did with Roxanne. I brought up the article by Rhonda Gerard. She wrote the article, Why I Hate White Belly Dancers, sometime between.
Oh, yes. Okay, I'm familiar with it, yes.
So one thing I wanted to bring up, just because she is a Middle Easterner and she is a Middle Eastern Studies professor at the University of Chicago, one thing that she brought up was the fact that she thinks it's really weird that white women take on names of the culture. And actually, I just realized that you are the first person that we've had on this show who uses a name of the culture like Faiza and I do.
Okay.
Adrienne. Well, Laura uses Laura Lale, but for the most part, they use Corey Zamora. Roxanne Shelby is of the culture, but for the most part, these other people that we've had on the show use their own names. Whereas my mother did not give me the name Perazad. Faizas did not give her that.
My mom can't even pronounce my name.
So I was just wondering, what your thoughts were around that, as a dancer, as somebody who is married to somebody of the culture, and as an anthropologist, if you had any insights on that.
It's a great question. And so I'll point back to the journal issue I was just telling you about that's going to be within the Journal of Intersectionality, of course. Intersectionality, as imagined by Kimberly Crenshaw, really sort of imagines those identities sitting at an intersection, right? And we have so many of them that overlap and influence one another in some really complex ways. Having said that, this is one thing that I think that we're starting on it, but I think we could have better, more nuanced conversations about sort of these complex identities that we come with to belly dance world. When I came to belly dance world, a million years ago BC, absolutely. It was exotic. It was beautiful. It was sexy. The music was great. The costumes were fantastic, right? Did I think too much about appropriating or even wearing stuff? Not really, no. It was sexy and it was exotic. 25 years later, is it still sexy and exotic for me? Yeah. It is. And it's an aspect, I think, especially of American belly dance world, right? It is exotic. There is a certain exoticism to it. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Depends on how we deal with it. Case in point, my name, Amani, was gifted to me by a friend, and I'll tell you that story in a minute. I was born autumn, just like the season, right? As I started to travel in the Middle East more, as I started working with more Middle Easterners, Arabic speakers in particular, nobody could say autumn. And then reasonably so, if you're the belly dancer, there's a certain exoticism that has to go along with your show if you're performing, right? If you're a performing entertainer, there's a certain exoticism that goes along with the show. Autumn, not really kind of fit in that persona. So a buddy of mine from Kuwait, we were in undergrad together, just could not say autumn. It always Adam, Ottoman, which I always thought was really funny because I would say to him, it's like, listen, Arabic has got more sounds than English. Why? Why you can't? Okay, anyhow, so he gets really frustrated with me one day and he says, you know what, I'm just going to give you a different name. And I laughed it off and I didn't think too much about it until a couple of weeks later. I was walking across campus and I saw him and a group of his friends that were also from the Gulf. And he looks over at me and was like, yeah, Amani, shlonik. I was like, oh, oh, and then he's like, yeah, I think I'm gonna call you Amani. I'm like, what? What's Amani about? He's, well, Amani's my oldest sister and she's my favorite sister. I'm like, oh, okay, that sounds reasonable. And then he explained to me Amani was hopes and wishes and this other kind of stuff. So I was like, oh, okay, I like Amani. Okay, that sounds good. And then everybody could say it, right? The English speakers could say Amani, Arabic speakers could say Amani. Fast forward to when I met my husband, native Kurdish speaker, but also an Arabic speaker, second language. He met me as a belly dancer. I was on top of a table dancing at Taverna Plaka here in Atlanta. That's how we met. And so he met the belly dancer. And so he only knew me as Amani. And I remember one of our early dates, I really asked him, I said, you do know what my actual name is, right? Just, yes, of course I know what your name is, Adam. What? Yeah, he's actually struggled with my name, which is kind of funny. And then eventually when I met my in-laws, I was Amani. Amani just became part of my being. But is it exotic? Is it appropriating or borrowing from another culture? Yes. I think we're having a hard time exploring this notion of appropriation, but at the end of the day, you can only appropriate something if you have the power to do so. People who have no power don't get to appropriate. It's people with power who get to appropriate, right? However that power might be, social, cultural, economic, political power, right? Or just direct force, we're going to take it from you. And that I think is that intersection where we need to start sort of exploring, who's holding power, who's wielding power. But coming around to it, you also make a really interesting point, because now we're in this interesting time in our community where we have many, many more Native artists who are involved in it, right? And there's this whole international scene that we're all participating in. So it's much easier for us to, let's say, go to Egypt or to have the Dinas and Brandas of the world come to us, right? And so now we're entering in this conversation about who owns this dance, who gets to make decisions about it, whose voice should be heard and shouldn't be heard. And it's just incredibly complex.
Tell us, we're kind of on this subject, not really, but tell us about the intensive that you're coming out here to LA to do.
I would love to tell you about that. So it's the Iraqi Dance Intensive, and this whole project was rooted with Sarah Al-Hadithi and Mohanned Hawaz. Mohanned, of course, is our master instructor. Sarah brought him out last year in December, and I think a few of you were able to go and witness the awesome that is Mohanned. For a relatively young man, he has had a really outstanding career, of course, highlighted, as so many people know, with the Iraqi National Troop. I came onto this with my greater interest in Iraq. Of course, I work in Iraqi Kurdistan, but you can't understand Iraqi Kurdistan out of context without Iraq. We were supposed to have Mohanned in October. Of course, the plague has come and offered us some new challenges to hurdle. So we've moved it to May, the weekend of 14, 15, 16. I'm really excited about this for a couple of reasons. First off, Mohanned is an excellent teacher who comes from a deep background of knowledge. I know that Sarah and I are interested in crafting an event kind of to the points that we were talking about earlier, about gaining a more complex, nuanced perspective about the people whom these dances come from, right? The cultures whom these dances come from. And you're definitely going to get that with the Iraqi Dance Intensive. I also, for my own set of biases, think it's time for our community to turn back to folklore and turn back to our roots a bit. And I think this is a wonderful opportunity to do that. And again, kind of like I was saying to you with my work with Iraqi Kurdish artists, that there's next to no documentation. We find the same thing with Iraqi dance. There's next to no documentation, at least outside of Iraq. And so for Americans, I think one of the small benefits, unfortunately, of the violent engagements we've had there has been an interest in the country and in the people. But we have so little quality research that's been done and needs to be done. And in the situations like Iraq, you're facing a situation where those resources, and when I say resources, I'm not just talking books or archives or museums or things like that, right? We tend to think of knowledge residing in a book or in a statue in a museum, these kinds of stuff. We continue to forget that knowledge resides right here with people. Every person is that sum total of their lived experiences, their social, their cultural, their political knowledge, right? Every time we lose a person, you have literally lost a piece of humanity's knowledge. Well, so this is what Sarah and I are doing about that, is to start to create this space. I'm really looking forward to working with Mohanned. He's already had an amazing career. I see really, really big things for him, and I hope people will come and join us.
I'm really looking forward to it. And I understand what you're saying. Dance is something that is very hard to document, like the history of it. So in my hobby, I study medieval Central Asian dance.
That's right. You're a Scadian, aren't you?
Yeah, I am.
Right, that's right.
And actually, my mentor lives in Atlanta. So.
Oh, what a small world.
Yep. So.
I swear we all know everybody else.
I know.
Tell you, this world is too small.
It's one of the criticisms I have from people who are studying more static forms of art is that they say, well, you can't prove this is what it looked like. And I'm like, well, you can't really prove that this is what that tasted like. You know, you're taking the information that you have, and the way that I go about it is when I'm doing Persian dance in particular, I take the miniatures of the dancers, copy the poses, move from one pose to the next, and I say, this is the closest I can get. And I try to marry it with classical Persian dance that can be documented a certain, but not as far back as I need. But I mean, there are a lot of similarities even with the poses and things like that. And so, okay, this probably would fit here and that kind of thing. And the weird thing that I do is I watch videos of Uyghurs because I think they have a vested interest because they are so divorced from their origin. And so they have a much more vested interest in maintaining the tradition of that dance as opposed to modern Persians who are anything they do is Persian dance.
Well, yeah. Well, no. The thing is no. I love what you're saying, and I think there are two good points here. Earlier we were talking about power. This is a power conversation, right? The first little bit of power is who makes the decisions about what art should be documented and what art gets forgotten. It has been my experience around the Middle East that dance kind of falls on the lower end of the hierarchy, right? Most of the cultures in the Middle East that I've had experience with, right? Literature and poetry, these kinds of things are very high on the food chain. Music is up there too, but definitely the dance arts, in terms of getting documented, okay, so then where do we look, right? And so this was my challenge working with Kurdish visual artists. So when I say visual artists, who am I working with? I'm working with a lot of painters, sculptors, working with a lot of conceptual artists, sort of broadly defined visual arts. The example that I often give, and I had to sort of make this argument with my dissertation in a field, so coming out of conflict management, right, international conflict management in a department and in a field that was heavily dominated by international relations, I had to make the argument why art was even scholarly and then why it would be useful, right? The point is I had to make this argument as to why art would be useful for the study of conflict or useful for study of identities, which seemed completely self-evident to me. And I think for most artists, we already implicitly understand that we are dealing with the very building blocks of culture. We deal in meaning making every day, expression, interpretation, right? Because art doesn't just reflect life, it interprets it. That's the key, right? It interprets it. And I think we implicitly understand that, but I don't think most artists and most artistic communities are particularly good at explicitly explaining that key point. We already know why it's useful and cool and beneficial. So I had to make that argument. That's a power conversation, right? And then the other thing too is, again, what's getting documented, what's not getting documented. In the case of like Kurdish visual artists, there is an element of that they are a marginalized community and it hasn't been documented. Or if it has been documented sort of in the greater histories of Iraq, they're not listed as Kurds, for example. It could be that the resources, again, the human resources, or let's say a written document is destroyed, dead, it's gone. That could be an aspect of it. With the Kurds, and this is also true in the rest of the Middle East too, though, you have a heavy, heavy oral tradition. And our Western traditions tend to favor written documentation over an oral tradition. So if it's an oral tradition, well, where do you go? Where do you even start with that? So you can imagine my department for my dissertation was like, the hell are you doing? It's never going to work. I can't even begin to tell you how many times this was never going to work. But I was very fortunate to have a great dissertation chair and a great committee who believed in what I was doing. But so my answer to that question is, well, where do you even start with that? Is to start with the contemporary. Right. Start right here and right now. Start with the living people. Start with good ethnographic research. Start with good interviews. Have conversations with the people. They're the experts. They know where the cool is. They know what the stories have been passed down. They might not know all the pieces, but it's there, and that's where you start with it. So no, I feel you with your research, and I love to hear that research. It also kind of reminds me too of like when I was learning Greek dance. I had the good fortune to get to dance with a Greek troupe for a while. I learned quickly, and it was pointed out to me by my teacher at the time that, there are a lot of dances that are being done in the Greek diaspora. Those histories are being held in the Greek diaspora that aren't even being done in Greece anymore, that are long gone from Greece. Right. Yeah, that's fantastic. These different. No, but it means then that you have to start to be creative in your thought process and start to think about, okay, where else could these histories be? Where else could these stories possibly be? Which is why I love what you guys are doing, not just because you decided to ask me onto your shows. Thank you so much for that. Because I have to tell you, I've been enjoying your shows in secret. I was like, oh, I hope they ask.
Oh, yay.
Yes. No, but really and truly, you guys are doing such good work because our community really isn't documented. It might seem like we're sitting here gabbing, but really what you're doing is oral history. And that's an activism. That's fantastic.
You're gonna make me
I
cry.
know. Thank you for validating us.
But again, rolling back to the earlier questions you were asking me about, like sort of those conversations that were sort of appropriation adjacent, I guess I'll call it, when we're sort of having that conversation, white girls doing belly dance and that whole thing. Things like what you guys are doing, right? Collecting these stories, that then becomes a repository for us to then look at ourselves. And we can't have conversations about power and appropriation and what we're doing and our role in it, our past role in it, what our future is going to be, without being able to reflect on ourselves, right? Which is something that art does really, really well. It helps us reflect.
I still have 1,001 questions for you, but we're also respectful of your time.
No, I am really, really thrilled to be here. And I thank you again so much for inviting me, for letting me plug the Iraqi Dance Intensive next year in May.
You've been such a wonderful guest. So that has been this week's episode of Rox Talks. Thank you again to Amani Jabril for coming on. Thank you again to our subscribers for sticking with us, 100 plus.
Yay!
So please continue, if you like our stuff, to like, comment, subscribe, and share with your friends. But I'm Parazad.
I'm Faiza.
And that's been Rox Talks.
Masalama.